Welcome to Coffee and Divination, a podcast about the arts of obtaining hidden knowledge in changing times. Join me, Joanna Farrar, to chat with experts from around the world on tarot, runes, geomancy, and the many ways divination can help us navigate and plan our paths ahead.
My guest today is Jason Miller. Jason is probably familiar to many of my listeners. He is the author of many books, including The Elements of Spellcrafting, Protection and Reversal Magic, Financial Sorcery, The Sorcerer's Secrets, and most recently, Consorting with Spirits, Your Guide to Working with Invisible Allies. Jason is also well known for teaching courses online, primarily centering around practical magic, as well as work with St. Cyprian, with Hecate, and most recently with Jupiter in the Sorcery of Achievement course. I really enjoyed this conversation with Jason. We get into a lot of practical tips for divination, a lot of discussion around the whys of divination and how we should think about divining when it comes to our own success and what we might be putting in the way of our success, whether we know it or not. If you do enjoy the podcast and what we're doing here, I really hope that you will take the time to subscribe and also to leave us a 5-star review wherever you listen to these episodes. It really does make a difference for us. And if you have ideas for guests or things that you'd like to hear on the show, we will be starting a Patreon for this show very soon. And you can get some advance notice about some of the exciting stuff we'll be introducing the next couple of months through our website at coffeeanddivination.com, or you can always find me on Instagram and send me a quick message there. Without further ado, enjoy the episode. Thank you so much for joining us today. It is my immense pleasure to have Jason Miller on the show. I'm sure many of you already know his works. You've heard about his books and his courses and the fantastic work that he's been doing with the magical community for many years now. And I wanted to get us started first by asking you, Jason, if you wouldn't mind. Oftentimes in these podcasts, I will ask people to introduce a little of their magical background, but through the lens more of divination, of what some of your first interests were or your first exposures to divination were. Some people were interested in it from their childhood. Others, it was just part of their magical beginnings when they first got interested in occult things. So I was wondering if you could just tell us a little bit about that background, since your background is very broad, obviously, with these topics.
It is. And often on podcasts, I talk about like the sort of otherworldly and spirit experiences I had when I was really young, like 5 years old. And then I say as a teenager, I got more involved. But how I got involved as a teenager, it was all about divination. I read a book that a friend gave me. I think I was 14 or 15. And it was one of those really thin, like, whatever the equivalent of Goosebumps was back in the 80s, right? And it was called Eyes of the Tarot. And there was a character, I remember, like, the evil magician's name was like Megistomes or something. Like, that's how, like, schmaltzy it was. So, but it just, the idea of tarot, like, caught my eye, and that kind of woke me up. And, at the time, of course, I can't drive, and I had no idea you could just go to the store and buy a tarot deck. This seemed like something that was way too mystical for that. So I'm in the middle school or the high school library, and I'm looking at copies of the Man, Myth, and Magic Encyclopedia, which I have behind me here. And in one of them, or in one of maybe another book, there was like a layout of the whole Rider-Waite magical, major arcana. And I photocopied them all. Me and my friend Don, we sat there and we photocopied all the cards out of a book. And so the first readings we ever did, either one of us, were with these black and white photocopies of the Rider-Waite out of a book. But we were getting great and actionable results without really knowing much on how to read. Mm-hmm. So here I am then in my lunch period, I think it was, and the talented and gifted teacher sees us. She's also a history teacher, but we had her for talented and gifted. And she sees us like goofing off with these, and she's like, you should probably just spend the $12 and get, you know. And she's like, well, I'm going up to New Hope this weekend, and I'll get you a deck if you want, because I was like, I don't know where to get. And New Hope, if you're in central New Jersey, New Hope is like on the Delaware River on the Pennsylvania side, and it had like, at that time it had like 3 or 4 different New Age stores, each with its own focus, which basically makes it like, the Delaware Valley equivalent of Salem or the French Quarter, right? So it was a destination for all the witchy people at the time. And I didn't know any of this because, again, too young. And then, so I get this, and she very kindly gives a few lessons, and then gives some instructions for psychic protection. And then throughout the rest of my high school experience, she was there to sort of say, this book, not that book, the LBRP, yeah, that's cool. This is, so it was great. But it all started with the Rider-Waite and a really spongy book on, for the eyes of the tarot. So yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, that's fantastic. And it's always so interesting to see what those first things are that can reach us. And I know I've found some of my, like, those old paperback things that I found when I was 12, and like, wow, this is not great information, but my goodness, did it kick off an excellent, beginning to things. And you clearly had good instruction. You had someone there who was, thankfully able to sort of give you that first taste, which is wonderful.
It is. And I always say it kind of outlines the difference between what our generation had to deal with and what the current and honestly what every generation beforehand had to deal with versus the current generation. It's an almost flip side problem, right? So if you were coming up in the 80s or even the early 90s, the issue was getting any kind of information at all, right? So if all you had was Al Manning helping yourself with white witchcraft, you worked with it, right? You made something out of it. The first conjuration of a demon I ever did was from like the complete book of magic and witchcraft, which is like this thin, and but had the basic stuff from the Grimoire Verum inside. But I still love all these books. I love the Modern Witch's Spell Book and these things because they can, even if the individual methods are a little, I don't know, the principles are there. And whereas now, sadly, there's such overwhelming amount of information for people coming up that the problem is finding the signal through the noise, right? Like we just had what we had and we had to make something out of it, and we made do, and by making do we also kind of struck at what was really vital and what was not. Like, okay, the factual history of this might not be correct, but there's a truth of meaning as well, and that holds whether the fact is true, and the usefulness holds. Whereas now it's like somebody gave us back the Library of Alexandria, but said, but we're going to hide it all in like piles of landfill garbage. Like, and you've got to dig through to find anything worthwhile. And when you do, like, there will be 12 people telling you that you're wrong at every step and you're a bad person for even thinking that way. And I do not envy those coming up in this era. I mean, I envy some of the better translations and things they have, but just getting to them.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that is something it's difficult to give people tools for how to have that discernment. And discernment is something that you talk about in a number of your books, about the importance of that and having the skills, we're talking about this from the skills to, on one level, know whether someone is telling you that the Library of Alexandria just burned down 50 years ago. Maybe that's not historically accurate. So you need to be able to do some research to find out that they don't know what they're talking about historically. But then there's also magical discernment, and the discernment to be able to find what is real out of that, which kind of skips a little bit ahead in the questions that I wanted to ask you, but I feel like we're kind of there. We're talking about fundamental skills, really, of magic, which then ties directly into divination. And in your most recent book, but also in a couple of others, you talk about obviously meditation being one of those fundamental skills, but you also talked about the importance of having times of doing nothing. So I was wondering if maybe you could talk about what you see some of those fundamental skills being, because that obviously underlies divination as well as other things.
Yeah. So I'm a big fan of sitting and doing nothing. And so I like to tell people there are 3 different kinds of sitting around that we should master, really. And from outside, they all look the same. So the first is that focused meditation, right? You're focused on the breath, or you're focused on a tarot card, or you're focused on a point in space, and thoughts arise and you recognize that you're distracted and you go back to that, right? So it's focus, recognize distraction, release, focus, rinse, repeat every half a second. And people think I'm bad at meditation, but in fact, that's actually what it is that they should be doing. Like those moments of clarity, they come later. They don't come when you sit down and but I'm in full lotus and I've been doing it for 3 minutes. I should be fully enlightened by now. I don't understand. I haven't been visited by the Buddha. So, that's number 1, right? You're sitting doing nothing, but your mind is focused. Then there's what's called contemplation by both Teresa of Avila and Nemkai Norbu, where we're sitting and we're open, right? We're resting in the nature of mind, the nature of our experience, but not the content of it. And this is a little hard for people to grasp, but we're not focused on a single thing. We're letting thoughts go, but still without attaching to any of them, without feeling like we are angry or we are happy or we are these things. These things are occurring in the mind stream, right? That's a little more difficult, a little more mystical, contemplative, but really important. But then the third thing that I call idle time or connection time is something that we never really had to think about doing before because it just happened to us. But throughout the last few hundred years, it has happened to us less and less. And then in 2007, we sort of stabbed it to death with an iPhone. And that is the idle time, the time that you're not focused your mind and you're not even worried about just being open. You're entertaining all those thoughts that naturally bubble up and occur. You're building connections between all the things that you've taken in, right? I was listening to an interview with an author, and I can't remember who. It was on a road trip last year, but they said that they went out into the to take a break in the country, as authors are wont to do, and they brought all these books with them, and they read through like 12 books and realized they weren't getting a lot out of it. So they started taking long walks because they're in the country. And when they started juxtaposing the reading with the walking and the reading with the sitting, they got more out of the books because they're building connections between the books. They're giving time to think about and really integrate this. And so we would have it just before, the iPhone, we would have stood in line for a coffee. We would have sat in the car, maybe listening to music, but not engrossed in a podcast. We would have mowed the lawn or taken a walk or, just hung out. And we do this less and less and less and less. And I'm sure that, people, are like our parents, the boomer generation would have said, yeah, before TV, we had much more of this connection time. And they're right. So it's like anything else. When you lose something, you have to make up for it, right? Like we don't need to walk and run everywhere we go anymore. So now we have to think, well, when am I going to walk and run? Otherwise, I'm going to become really unhealthy. So we get on a treadmill, we go to the gym, we meet our friends at the track. We have to consciously say, I'm taking this back because my current lifestyle doesn't make this necessary. Same thing with idle time, right? So when it comes to divination, I would say about, I don't know if it's 7 to 10 years ago, I don't know the time, but I kind of broke my whole approach to divination and got back to basically what cartomancers that I used to make fun of did. And it's all about connection. It's all about looking at a spread of cards and not thinking at all about elements and symbols and sephira and Hebrew letters and runes and I Ching and all these other things that we've layered on. It's not even about remembering what this card means traditionally. First line is, what does this picture say? These 3 cards together make a picture. What do they say? Matt Arn last night, was comparing like how Eliphas Levi made poked at Tiela, Waite poked at Levi, Crowley poked at Waite, and I said, take all of their books to the recycling bin, make some nice cardstock and print out a Marseille tarot and get some kid that's good at making pictures, like have stories out of pictures, and you'll get so much further. And I'm just, it was like, so that ability to look and make connections, that ability to look at Justice and the Hanged Man and think, oh, Justice in the Marseille Tarot has this rope around her, she wears it almost. Is that the rope that hangs the Hanged Man's foot? And what does that mean? Right? What does it really mean when I've got the Hierophant and the Devil, both of whom have a single card and 2 people underneath? The Lovers too, never mind the Devil and the Hierophant and the Lovers. What are happening to these figures that they're transforming from Hierophant to Devil to Lovers? Because is it the same 3 people? Who are those 3 people, right? In your life. And that takes that idle time. It takes that connection time. It takes that letting go a little bit. And I'm not saying that knowing, the traditional importance isn't important. But it's like the second layer. Like once we have this picture, now let's lay that on top. And then if we want to lay on other things, then we can lay that on top. But
yeah, no, I could not agree more. I think that what you're saying about it being second level, in that sense, I would also agree, because I think that there's also times when the other element of that, the meditation portion of the idleness. By the way, I just have to say, my husband and he will oftentimes say, I just need a moment of repose, because I'm the Aries in the relationship that is like, I have like 10 projects right now. They need to be done in the next hour. And he's like, but we need a moment of repose. So when you're saying that, I was like, oh, the moment of repose. Yeah, about that. But when it comes to the second layer, it's also that sometimes when we are too emotionally close to or invested in something, it is difficult to get out of our own way and not read in either what we desperately want or what we're just too afraid is going to happen. So then that's that. How do you get to the point where your ego or your fears or something else isn't getting in the way of your own ability to look at those stories? So do you find still that there are times when you're like, I need to get away from this in some way. I need to somehow have a step back from it in order to get an objective read on it? Or do you feel now when you lay out cards and you're doing this, you can see the writing on the wall in a sense?
Oh, well, being a perfectly enlightened Buddha.
Oh, well, of course, as an enlightened being.
Yeah. As an enlightened being, I don't have these problems. No, of course. And so, one of the things, certainly one of the things that meditation gives is this distance between what you're thinking and what you're aware of, right? So if you meditate a lot, then something comes up and you recognize it as something that's in your mind stream, not that is your mind stream, right? So it's no longer a matter of I'm scared, but fear is occurring in my mind stream. But because I can feel it means I am not that, which means my mind stream is bigger than this. So I can look at that. And then the other thing with divination is I'm always really on the guard for, is this telling me what I expect? Is this telling me, in which case it's not really useful. Is this telling me what I want to hear? So I always go and look at, like, what do I not want to see? I don't do a lot of public divination, but in 2016, I did a divination about who would win the presidential election, and without getting into politics, the guy I didn't want to win, the cards just said was going to win. This was August. And people were like, no, look at this the other way. No, it's not this. You're no. And I'm like, no, it's this. I don't want it to be, but it absolutely is this, right? Like this is what the picture is saying. And sadly, the cards were right. But you have to, like, even if you're not meditating, if you just have that level of really just basic self-awareness of, like, is this confirmation bias? Like, am I just hearing what I want to hear? There's a great book came out a couple of years ago called Scout Mindset that I wish, like, if I could give assigned reading to everyone on the planet, this would be, like, definitely up there, because it's the difference between what they call soldier mindset and scout mindset. Soldier mindset is directional reasoning. So everything you encounter is a matter of, must I believe this or can I believe this? If it says something I want to hear, even if it's not well supported, you're sort of, or stuff that you really should verify. You're kind of like, can I believe this? If I can believe it, I'm going to, because it's what I want to hear and it supports. Or must I? Like, this seems facts, but maybe there's some way I can poke a hole in it, because, or to show that it's not 100% certain, therefore I don't need to believe it, right? So that's directional reasoning. We're going in and we're like, we've got an agenda. I want to see this, or I don't want to see this. Whereas the scout mindset is this accurate? And so if you just, I mean, honestly, this, in a way, I almost want there not to, the book itself is great, but I would love for there to be a pamphlet for people. Just like, be aware of this. Like, that's it. Like, just the simple awareness that we do this, and it cuts you off from that, is enough to say, okay, this is what I want to hear. Maybe I should be skeptical and take another look, or get a second opinion, right? Or more to the case with divination, this is what I'm afraid of hearing. And because I don't know about you, but one of the things before I stopped reading for clients that was like a recurring disappointment is people would have an idea and they're excited about the idea and they want to know if anything would go wrong. Well, yeah, something always goes wrong somewhere along the line. This is the hard-edged world we live in, right? It's imperfect, but then they'd find out something goes wrong and be like, I shouldn't do it. And I'm like, no, you should do it. Like, your question was, is anything going to go wrong? Not, am I going to lose everything? So it's that kind of thing that I'm like, we having our fears confirmed is just as damaging as having our what we want to see confirmed.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think that probably also speaks to when there's always that danger of seeing omens in everything, because we can apply that outside of, cards or runes, where, I mean, personally, I do seer work within a sort of Greek tradition because I work with Apollo for it, though it's very different. So in that sense, there's that idea of, spirits will get messages to us any way that they can, which does mean sometimes that, of course, it's part of that idle time, part of those long walks is that you have to leave room for spirit contact, which is another form of communication or divination, because it's information gathering and paying attention. But then you also have to make sure that while you are open to it and not just dismissing and saying, I probably just made that up, that you still also have discernment with it. So can you talk a little bit about how you think of that in the context of spirit contact or omens or anything like that?
Yeah. So I've done a lot of thinking about this. My last book was Consorting with Spirits. And like you, I do a lot of work with spirits. And so everything from the direct messages to the omens and portents and things like that. And so it all boils down to, I have a few different filters. It's important to have these sort of filters that you run it through, right? And one of the filters that people run it through that I think is less helpful is this an authentic communication or not, right? The idea being that if Apollo or Hecate says this, then it's 100% reliable. I've got to do it. In fact, if I don't do it, maybe, I'll be cursed forever, right? And whereas on the other hand, if it's not her or him or them, then it's all just fantasy gobbledygook, right? And I'm terrible at this, and and so then we experience like identity collapse. But it's generally a bad way to look at it, because there's no experience that we ever have that is 100% pure perception without our projections, right? So we project onto every experience. You and I will both walk away with a different opinion and recollection of this very conversation. It will be part projection and part perception. So if this is what happens in our firm, gross, subtle, world, how much more does it happen with subtle beings, right? Significantly so. So the questions I always go to are, how would you handle this if it was another person, right? If a person was saying this, how would you handle it? Well, for one thing, there's no one that would give me advice that I would be like, well, they said it, ergo, I need to accept it without critique. Nobody, right? I would add weight depending upon who said it, but still, not without critique. So I always look at, the first thing is it actionable? Is it meaningful? Right? These are the two things. Action, literally something that I should be doing or not doing. Meaning, a way to frame my experience going forward. If it doesn't provide one of those two things, then the authenticity of the message doesn't really matter, right? It could be just, a thumbs up, like, cool. So, then we don't need to obsess over whether the thumbs up came from Apollo or our own brains or something like that, because it's just a thumbs up. Take it as a pat on the back. Keep going. Like, good job. Keep doing what you're doing. And then if it is meaningful and actionable, rather than worrying about like where it's coming from, how would you evaluate it if somebody else told you something actionable and meaningful? You look at whether it makes sense or not, whether the risk is something that you're willing to take or not, and make your own discernment. And everybody knows how to do this with people. But as soon as it's spirits or deities, it's like discernment that we've already developed just goes out the window. But it shouldn't. It's just like it is with people, right? Like if it's the dead, well, Uncle Tom isn't necessarily smarter now that he's dead than he was when he was alive. He's not dumber either. His available information is different, perhaps, but it doesn't mean that it's perfect. It's different kind of insight, but you still run the insight through those filters, right? So that's how I look at it. That's how I think of it. And just kind of how does it go with people?
Yes. So that's I don't remember. I think it was in Consorting with Spirits. I don't remember which book, but it's something about basically, if you put it as, sort of, if you would be considered a jerk for doing it to a person, maybe you shouldn't be interacting that way with the spirit either. But it's just the same goes both ways. Like these relationships are multifaceted. The spirits themselves are multifaceted, and therefore one-dimensional views of them or attempts to shove them into a one-dimensional box are probably going to go about as well as that would go with a person. Not very well. With that being said, when people are looking to, when you are doing divination and you are looking for those forms of information checking, obviously there's the rational, those questions that you just asked of, is this actionable? Is it useful? There's also, are there times when you will say, well, I got this strange reading from whatever, if you're still Rider Waite or whichever deck you're using, do you then go and check off of another system? Do you sort of advocate for multiple forms of divination to check things, or is it something where you're like, no, I go with this and then I'll kind of riff off of that in another way that's not divination?
I both really.
Yeah.
So before I wrote The Sorcerer's Secrets, I sat down with a spy and talked about intelligence gathering. And they pointed out that there's a difference between data and intel. That data is points of information that you get in, and they're evaluated individually, but that actionable intel is made up of different types of data woven together. So for sure, if if you're getting a strange reading or one that you want to look deeper into with tarot, and you're adept, or someone else who is adept at something else, or even at another type of sortilege, then absolutely, go for it. If you can read coffee grounds, then do that.
Mm-hmm.
If you read the entrails, then it's messy, but it's worth it. But then also, so if I've got a situation where 2 or 3 different types of divination are confirming something, but it doesn't make sense as far as non-magical methods, that's when I'm on the lookout for the Rumsfeldian unknown, right? The things we don't know that we don't know. Because you can't make sense out of those. And that's one of the things that divination can do, is because it is more subtle, it lacks sometimes the straightforwardness of like a person pulling you aside and like, you're going to get laid off tomorrow. The VP just told me, and, or I saw this on the list. But so the straightforwardness is not the same, but the availability is a little bit wider and more subtle. So it can pull from areas that we can't. So you can get, that's when I'm like, okay, this isn't nothing, because now it's confirmed from multiple sources of divination, yet I'm not seeing anything. I mean, if you are seeing something physically or in the mundane world, for lack of a better word, then great. Now you've got something that's really actionable. But if not, that's still when you want to keep a lookout and be like, okay, there is something coming and it's going to look like this, but I might not be able to tell exactly what. But still in all, it's data points that you weave into intel. And I said this a couple months ago, and a couple people got really, really, really upset. Their attitude is, I've spent my life learning divination, and one of them was from a traditional, a very traditional path, and they were like, this is, people have done this for thousands of years. It's deeply ingrained in the culture, and we base everything off of this. How dare you just call it a data point, like it's not even real? And I'm like, no, the fact that it's real means it is a data point. It's not 100% reliable. That's what real things are like. Real things are not usually, and you can take it to the bank every single time. Like if the doctor gives you medicine, there's a chance it doesn't work. There's a chance you need a different medicine. There's a chance that your body fights back. There's a chance you need, you know what I mean? Like, it doesn't mean that the doctor's not real or the medicine's not real. This is how real things work. lawyers, doctors, real estate, like everything has this, you know, this fallibility to it that is real. So when people are like, my divinations are infallible, and I'm like, that is the sign of a fantasy, not of reality. That's where the fantasy comes in. That's where it's like, no, nothing is like this other than like purely physical laws.
Yes, yes. Other than the glass that my cat knocks off the table will break. Other than that, yes. And they will knock it off the table because they're cats. No, I think that then we're immediately getting into the fate versus free will discussion, which is fascinating and always very nuanced. And I think that obviously, as we are talking about divination from the perspective of magic users and people who work with witchcraft, I'm always very interested to talk about how we view the amount that something is changeable versus what it is not, what is fated versus what is not. And I think what you were already saying about probability levels, I'm sure that it's very much on that spectrum. But do you feel like, how to put this in a succinct question? There are times that the spirits that you're talking to will influence the kinds of answers you get about how much is changeable or not. In a sense, do you work with the cards always with a particular set of spirits in mind that you're aiming to talk to? Does that change? Do you think the kinds of answers or the amount that they think something is able to be changed or not? Is it outside spirits that are not necessarily God-based or specific spirit-based?
Yeah, so I do think different spirits look at things differently for sure. But it's funny, when I'm reading the cards, I don't, unless I am specifically asking a spirit to speak through the cards, I don't consider it like, if I bless a deck or say a prayer to Hecate or Saint Sarah before a reading, I'm not considering it their voice. I'm considering it the cards and my ability to read the cards. So really what I'm asking for is a blessing on my ability to read, a blessing on the cards to be able to speak well, and so on. Not on, tell me through this reading, Hecate or Saint Sarah, what is true, unless that is the specific thing that I'm looking for. And I think different decks speak with different voices. And so, in a way, I think that there's the tarot itself is a spirit, and that just like all of us, when you approach us through different lenses, we react differently. If a student contacts me through my email, I'm reacting one way. If they call me up, I'm if they dig and find my personal phone, I'm reacting a very different way. So the different decks are, they speak differently. Every now and then I'll wake up and just have like this urge, like the Tarot Nusantara, like do a reading with that one today. And I can't even say where it comes from. And then there are some tarot decks that I get and I'm like, this is beautiful, but it doesn't speak like to, at least to me, at all. It doesn't feel like there's no anima to it for me. So yeah, they can speak differently, and just like with people, that's where your discernment comes in, and as far as fate versus free will, it's one of those things where I've never believed in fate. I don't even know what the point of magic is if you believe in fate, or that everything is fated to happen. And then free will, sometimes people don't take not only the free will of others, but also just random chance and circumstance into account. So then they get into this place of like, well, I'm in control of everything that happens to me. And they're like, no, you're not. Like, you are neither not it's not, you have some agency but not full agency. So I'm a probability person. I'm always like, let's just look at how difficult it is to make this happen rather than some other mechanism. And when we look at magic as a real thing that behaves like other real things, we don't need to ask questions like, well, if magic was real, why didn't my spell work? Well, that's like saying, okay, this small set of pliers is real. If it's real, why wasn't I able to just rip the door off my truck with it? It's like, because it's not up to the task, right? Like the pliers are real and the truck door is real, but this isn't the tool for that. It's needle nose pliers, not the jaws of life. And so that's where people get into magic and divination, like, well, why didn't it do this and that? Because even though they're saying magic is real and divination is real, they're not really looking at it as a real thing. They're still applying fantasy to it. So if the spell didn't work, well, then it's because my higher self didn't want me to have it, or God didn't want me to have it, or it's manifesting, but only in the astral, or all these other, like, just that, what crazy, like, rationalizations is like, no, it's because you tried to rip a car door off with needle nose pliers. That's all. It just, like, that's it. That's the end result. Like, you don't need to look any further than that. It wasn't up to the task. Other factors factored in.
Yeah, I think that kind of goes back to a little of what we were talking about, the discernment at the very beginning too, because when we're buried under so many stories and so much, oh God, social media, of stories of what people achieve. A, it's difficult to know what to believe, what what people have or haven't actually done, and B, then it's also something that I think makes people afraid to fail, because either it means that the whole thing isn't real and needle nose pliers don't exist actually, and you were believing a lie, or you're just terrible at it, and only other special people can learn how to properly use needle nose pliers, which is where one of the things I think is helpful for people is hearing about times when things don't work, and spells don't work, or things times when failure has happened to people that are quite experienced, because then it allows room for people to know that that's a part of the growth process and actually a feature, not a bug of the process. And we're not right now with social media really encouraged to do that. Doesn't just look good. So I don't know if you want to sort of talk about that, or maybe if there are times when you could talk about how something not working has helped your process, because I feel like that's an important part of people seeing how the not working is good sometimes, even though no one likes it.
Oh yeah. Now there are plenty of times when things aren't working. I mean, I remember a healing at a distance that wasn't working, and at first I was like, well, maybe the healing is not up to the task of the disease. And so then I used some divination, and the divination indicated that a better link would solve the issue, right? So rather than, oh, this isn't working, or, oh, this is fated or something. It was troubleshooting, right? Like, and I was willing to accept the idea that maybe I was trying to pull a Kardar off with needle nose pliers, but then divination was like, nope, get a better link. So I asked this person to, they had sent me their name on a photo of their signature that they had signed, thinking I'm giving Jason permission to do this work. And I said, can you send me that and a small piece of hair, right? Like, I know I'm asking, I'm a nefarious sorcerer who is asking for your hair. So it's sort of like, a little sus, but but you reached out to me, and I knew this person too, so they, that wasn't an issue. But so they sent it, and then signs started indicating, like, health started to improve, and the signs that I would have expected from the working started to manifest because we had a stronger link. And so then other people that I shared this with would say, so photocopies of signatures are not sufficient for magic. And I'm like, no, we can do plenty of magic with a photocopy of signatures. It wasn't sufficient this time. And that, it's so weird to me because, my job day in and day out is answering hours of questions every week from my courses about topics like this. And people stake out these either or ideas about magic and divination that they don't have about other real things. But even though they're saying magic is real, they're so hungry for like a confirmation that it's just weird to me. Like, they can understand, for instance, oh, well, this drug at this dosage didn't do the job, let's increase the dosage. And that everyone understands, right? Or this argument didn't sway the jury, let's try a different argument in the appeal. Everybody understands this. But when you're like, this didn't work for the magic and this did, people are like, that never works, this will work. Always. It's like, no, that's not how real things are. So it's interesting.
The search for absolutes sometimes is good, can help us find universals that will, mean learning can be a little easier the next time, but sometimes it's not universal.
Well, one thing I think that magic and politics share is sometimes people get in and they're looking for perfection. They're looking for these absolutes that are, 100% and reliable, and it's like you're going to be disappointed or confused or all the time if that's what your expectation is.
Yeah, I think there was like a Rumi quote, or it's from a poem, basically asking about true visions of God, and it's about like, does this make your life better? Does this make you a better person? Is this actionable in a way that is actually working? If so, good. That doesn't necessarily mean that it will always be that way or be that way for every spirit or every situation, but it is still true and is still real.
Yeah.
But that's tricky.
It is. Life is tricky.
Oh, yes. So I wanted to, before we, have to end, I mean, I love this conversation. I hope you will come back on another time, but I wanted to speak a little bit about the sorcery, the Jupiterian course that you've been running lately, the Sorcery of Achievement. And I thought that since we are talking about divination and how that interacts with making meaning and making things better, Do you see ways that divination and that sort of that Jupiterian course that you've been doing interacts? I can think of some ways, but I definitely want to hear from your perspective.
Yeah, so so the Jupiterian course is about it could very well be called like the get your shit together course. I don't know if I'm allowed to say naughty words, but
You
there
are
we are.
absolutely allowed to swear. So yes.
It could be called the like get your shit together course. It is about an approach to life and uh, finding out what's important and then actually executing the things that are important. And so divination as a tool in that, I think, is important. I think one of the areas that I differ from at least some people that are invested in divination is I don't like I don't like the entire, I don't want to call it a school of divination because it exists in every tradition on earth. But I don't like the what should I be doing with my life divination. I don't like the tell me what my destiny is and what my goal, like I'm not a fan of that. And some people love it and rely on it heavily. I was once thrown out of a group for basically saying like, I don't know, maybe you shouldn't base the whole rest of your life on a tarot reading. I like or like your moral code and things like this. So this is one of those areas where I'm like, divination is a great tool. But it's a great tool to use alongside other tools. It's not the only tool. And so when it comes to, to borrow a term from Napoleon Hill, your definite chief aim and what you want to achieve in life and what you're willing to give for that, divination can help. It can point, it can show obstacles, it can reveal things about you, but if it's not coupled with a sense of this is what I want out of life, these are my talents, these are my experiences, where do these intersect, and what do I want, right? Then I'm I'm not so in as far as divination supports that, I'm big into it. But some people kind of turn to divination, and instead of like, if I went back to school to study, molecular biology or something, it's what should I do with the rest of my life? Boom, 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 boom. And it's like, that's where I'm like, nah, no. Or even, like, I'm interested in doing this. Should I do it? And it's like, I don't know, if you're interested in doing it and your talents support it, then do it. And then if like, how about like, what kind of obstacles will I face if I do this? And, what will people rarely ask, what will I face if I don't? Right? Because that's really the other side of the question. It goes back to what we were saying earlier. You'll always face obstacles, no matter what you're going to do. And the bigger the thing you're trying to do, the bigger the obstacles you'll face. People that you've known your whole life, if you're doing a big change, there will be a couple of those people are going to turn away from you Some might even turn against you because you're no longer the person that you no longer fit into their box the way they wanted you to. There will be other people, the Yellowstone rule. If it's something worth building, there will be people coming to take it. It's true, though.
Yes.
Like people would rather take it from you than build it what they could build themselves. So, and all of that is true. And then if that comes up, then people, if you have the attitude of like, well, if I do this, this could happen. But what if I don't do this? Oh, well, then 10 more years of spinning your wheels and, that's not good either. If I get together with this person, will we be happy forever, always, with no problems? No. Like, I don't even need the divination. No.
Not need to break the cards out for that.
Yeah, it takes work, so no. Is it worth the work? Will I be happy versus will I be fulfilled? These are very different things. Things that make us happy on a day-to-day, like there were all these studies a few years ago. It was like, what was it, 5 or 10 years ago? It was like, a leather jacket makes you happier than kids. It's like, yeah, on the day you buy it or when you look cool wearing it, it makes you happy in that moment, and kids will make you friggin' miserable for years on end. But there's a difference between the fulfillment you get from one versus the fulfillment that you get from owning a badass leather jacket. The levels are quite different. So how we ask things of divination is sort of like the key to really getting the most out of it. And that too goes into playing into what we hope and what we fear.
Yes, and I feel like I just love to, as one of those points, as you mentioned, the way that we phrase questions is crucial, and making sure that we're not phrasing them in such a way that either, well, you really shouldn't need to ask that question because it's pretty clearly a yes or a no, in which case you're just doing this to get the confirmation that you wanted to hear. But is there anything else that you might give people as advice for how to better frame questions for themselves?
Oh, that's a good question. It's think about what would be fruitful to ask of another person, right? And before I said like it's not like should I do this or shouldn't I do this? And I know when I was coming up, there were a few writers that said you should never ask the cards like should I or shouldn't I? You should only ask like what will happen if. And I went by that for a long time, but then I kind of threw that out the window. And I'm like, well, if we're going to rely on them for what would happen if, then like a should I or shouldn't I, it's not really that. But it's always look at what happens if you don't do something. Look at both sides of the coin, always. And don't just look at problems, because if you're where you want to be and you're comfortable, that's great. But if you're comfortable in a place you don't really want to be, then discomfort and turbulence is going to be part of getting out. And people do this not just with divination, but with magic a lot. They keep the status quo that they really don't want. It's what they're used to, right? I mean, I guess people do this with everything, right? Like I know I'm overweight, and I remember when I would go to the gym and then I'd like hurt my hip and be like, oh, well, don't have to go to the gym anymore. I mean, I can't go to the gym because my injury prevents me from doing so. But what's the status quo then? What's the price of not facing up to the occasional injury? Being a fat ass. or worse, being unhealthy. So these are the kinds of things that are difficult. Like, what is the pain that you have to pass through to get to something better? So that's really it. Like get real about what things take. And I tell people all the time, like, open your mind enough to let magic and divination in as part of your reality, and then close it again. Like, just because you've accepted this thing that most of society doesn't accept as real doesn't mean that you then accept all the things that's like, and you live in the fantasy world, right? But a lot of people do this. And, every now and then on one of my groups or something, I'll be like, we don't do lizard people are running the world here. This is not something that we allow. And then some people are like, well, most of the world doesn't believe in magic either, so what the hell? And I'm like, yep. And because we believe in magic, we have even more reason to exercise discernment about other things. So, or we just, get into silly town. So,
I like that way of also looking at things that the cards can tell us as reminding us, or perhaps preparing us in some ways for the type of discomfort that we might get from when we make those changes that are difficult. If you want magic to make change in your life, if you actually want that, yes, there's going to be discomfort. And therefore, in that way, maybe it'll help if you kind of see a little bit of it coming. Maybe you won't just immediately think, oh, discomfort equals this isn't working, or discomfort equals I should stop doing it. That could be helping us see it as a way, as part of the way forward, as opposed to a moment of, oh, I guess it's just not working because things are happening that I'm not comfortable with. Yeah.
I remember I was doing a divination for someone, and their business was growing, and it was like their side hustle, and they were going to make it their main gig. And the readings were like, you're going to have back taxes. You're going to have to deal with regulations that you didn't deal with under the table. You've got it, like, all of a sudden you're going to have all these things that you've been avoiding dealing with, or just didn't have to deal with, that are now going to become part of your reality, and it's going to hurt, and they were like, well, maybe I shouldn't do this. And I'm like, no, let's go further out. And, will you get through this? Yes. And what's the point of divination if it's not to change or deal with what the divination predicts? Like, if the point of divination is to look back and be like, oh, that's what that meant. Well, that's like pointless. That's not worth spending time mastering. It's not why people relied on divination in the past. That's a party trick. So it's like, no, start putting money aside to deal with the tax issue when it comes up. Start, find an accountant and a lawyer and who deals with regulations and all these things, and realize that you're going to have like a little pain period, and then you've got to get through it.
Yes, that is really lovely. Before we wrap this up, I feel like you've already given so many things that I could qualify as answers to this. But is there any point that you would like to emphasize for people as something that you see frequently, as a thing that holds people back, either in their magical practice or in divination? Is there any piece of advice that you'd like to leave people with?
Goodness.
I know, trying to come up with one thing.
Yeah, no, there's so many things. That is, with divination, I have a rule that it's better to be wrong than to be vague. And so going back to that reading I was telling you about from 2016, right? And I predicted that Donald Trump would win. And people were like, no, they didn't want to hear it, right? And that was August. At October that year, I was appearing at a conference, and somebody stood up during my class, which was on tarot. It was called How to Read Like a Fortune Teller, Not an Esoteric Twaddle Pusher. And so they stood up and they were like, you gave this reading in August, and it clearly is not going to come to pass because look at the polls. Like, he doesn't think he's going to win. Would you like to reinterpret that spread now? And I said, no. And I said, even I think that I'm wrong. Like, even I, at this point, at this stage in the game, if you were to ask me to put money down, I would bet against that reading. But no, I'm not going to change my interpretation retroactively. I would rather be wrong than be vague. And as I said it, I kind of was like, actually, that's like a new rule. Like, better to be wrong than be vague. Think about the professionals that we hire all the time that can be wrong, but not vague. Doctors, lawyers, economists, weathermen, everything, right? Any field where someone is making a projection, they can be wrong. But if they're vague, they're useless. If they're wrong, we can look at how often they're right and decide how much weight we want to give to them, right? If somebody accurately predicts something 70% of the time, then we want to give a good deal of weight to their predictions. But they can still be wrong. If they're just vague and they say mysterious things that only make sense after the fact, they're useless. So I'd rather be occasionally wrong than always useless. And that's where we get into better to be wrong than vague. Like, get specific. Who is the emperor? Which older man is it? And people will see the emperor come up and they'll be like, oh, it's a major arcana. So it's a major thing about jobs or your interact, like this completely cosmic, vague. No. How does it relate to this question? Who is it? What is it? And people are really afraid to go there. They're afraid to put themselves on the line because they don't want to be wrong. Because being wrong causes identity collapse and all this kind of thing. And as bad as that is, better to be wrong than to be vague. Better to do magic and have it fail than to have 1,000 excuses as to why it doesn't work, or only do magic for vague things that you have all these Weasley caveats of like, well, as long as it's in what my higher self wants, or as long as the gods will, and like, nah, let's just put our asses on the line and see, and then if we're wrong all the time, then we know we're in the wrong game. Like if our magic works like 10% of the time, we know we're in the wrong game. We know we're approaching this in a bad way, and that's better too.
Yeah, you can't make.
I've had people
don't know that you should,
and just been like, this isn't panning out for me after a while, and I'll be like, okay, maybe this isn't for you, and and that's okay. Maybe there is something else for you, and it might not be this. And then I took Duolingo French, and I still don't know any French, like other than basics, despite sticking with it for a good amount of time. Doesn't mean that no one can learn it or that the program is bad. It just wasn't for me. So,
well, that is fantastic, and you have to then be able to be honest with yourself, and once again go back to that discernment.
Yep.
Yeah,
discernment, honesty, and keeping it real, as they say.
Well, I think that is a lovely thing to end with, and I really appreciate your time. Where can people find you? What do you have that you'd like to point people towards? I will obviously have things in show notes and links and all that, but what would you like to tell people about that?
Go to strategicsorcery.net. That's the place. And then there's a link to Monday Magic. If you sign up for the free newsletter, you'll get global rights, and you'll get emails of what I'm doing and when, and you'll stay abreast of everything. It's better than social media, better than anything else. That's the way to stay up with me. Obviously, you can follow me on Facebook and things like that, but the email list is the surest way to do it. It's not a free ebook, it's just an email list.
No, that is excellent. I'll put that all down there for people, and this has been very immensely informative and helpful, and I hope that we will talk again soon on the show. So thank you, Jason.
Oh, I hope so. Thank you for having me.
Stars overhead, don't you dare guide me back to my bed. The river is frozen.